In this video, I wanted to show the flip side of the connected scenario that we saw in the previous videos. Here again, we're going to use ADONET 2.0 to connect to a SQL Server Express Edition database, but not a SQL Server Compact Edition database. Oh, why not? Well, it goes back to what we said a few videos ago. The Compact Edition database is typically used by a single application at a time, so you can open a connection and stay connected to it until the application itself is shut down by the user. You use a disconnected approach when there are multiple users using the same database and you want to be frugal with the connections to the database to conserve resources and to avoid one user blocking another. So that's why this makes more sense to use SQL Server Express Edition, because it's the entry-level service-based database and it duplicates the disconnected scenario that we want to try to establish in this video. So in the connected scenario in the previous videos, we utilized ADONET's data reader. I said at that time that it was like a self-addressed stamped envelope that you give to the command and you say, go ahead and fill it up. There's another sense in which it's like a fire hose. You turn on the spout and the data comes pouring out until you shut it off and you disconnect the hose from the fire hydrant. In this video, we're talking disconnected. And so we're going to be using a different object. It's called a data set. And basically a data set is an in-memory representation of a database. So a data set will contain a table definition that each table definition has rows in it. Okay, so it sounds very database-ish. But the table definitions mirror the table definition in your database. So then you copy data from the database into your data set, your in-memory representation of the table object, of tables. And so then you work with that table object, or rather groups of objects if you're working with multiple tables, each with a number of rows, just like you're working directly with a database. You can insert, update, delete, and you can read through the data, and at this point you're completely disconnected from the database. You don't have a connection to the database. You're working with just the in-memory representation of the data. So part of the job of the data set is to keep track of all these changes that you're making to the data, because at some point you're going to connect back. Once you finish all your work with the data, you connect back up and commit all of those changes back to the database. Now, as usual, I've really oversimplified it here greatly, but hopefully this will serve as an overview of what we're going to do right now. And I want to remind you why I'm recording this particular video and the two that were previous to this one. I'm not doing this because I want you to use this code to write new applications, although you're welcome to use it. But as I said earlier, I think it's important that you know that ADONET 2.0 exists, and that there's a lot of legacy code written using ADONET 2.0. I think you should know what it is, but I don't think that this is what you're going to use in the year 2010 and going forward. So just watch the overall steps and familiarize yourself with the general terms and the major concepts and the objects and the approaches that I'm using here, both in the connected and disconnected scenarios in ADONET. But at this point, I'm not sure that you need to memorize any of this. And by no means is this video intended to be a comprehensive explanation of ADONET. We have other videos in our archives for that purpose, and I've already talked about that. So if the need ever arises, you should be able to look there. Okay, so here's the game plan for right now. I've already created a new project, as you can see on your screen. It's called ADONET 2 Disconnected Express. So the first thing I'm going to do is write some code, open a connection up, and grab the relevant data into a data set. And then I'm going to disconnect. And I'm going to show what's in the data set after we've already disconnected. Then the second thing is I'm going to basically do the exact same thing, but in the second pass I take through it, I'm going to create 4 data adapters. And those data adapters are like commands that will dictate what should happen to rows of data that were added, updated, or deleted from the data set. Then I'm going to use the update method to connect back to the original data source and commit the changes that were made while we were offline, while we were disconnected from the database. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. The first order of business then is to get a database that we can work with. So what I'm going to try to do is copy the database from the previous project, and to do that I'm going to right click and select Add Existing Item, and then I'm going to peruse through all my projects, I think I can go to this ADONET 2 Connected Express, and I'm going to change the filter to show me only the data files and select database 1 and select add. And that should copy it over and I should be able to connect up to it. Again, I'm going to cancel the data source configuration wizard when I get a chance to. Okay, so you can see now I'm working with database 1. I'll double click it to bring it up in the Database Explorer, just to verify that I have, in fact, connection to it. Awesome. Okay, so the next order of business is that I want to work with some other namespaces here. So let me add those, system.data, and then I want to work with system.data.SQL client, which gives me access to all the classes that will help me work with a SQL Express database. Okay, so let's begin with creating a connection, just like we did in the previous video. And at this point, I'm going to do a lot of typing with an occasional bit of explanation, so you can fast forward. I think I have a note in the video about this already. Okay, so here we go. So here we're going to create a new data set. And then, and this is the key part, we're going to call the fill, which will use the command that we've defined to fill up the data set with customer records. Now the first thing I want to do here is close the connection just to prove that we're not connecting still to the database. And then what we're going to do is loop through each row in the tables in our data set. So we're going to create a row. And because I don't know the table name, we could create a strongly typed version of a data set that would allow me just to go mydataset.customers.rows. But since I don't know the name, I'm just going to have to use its position within the data set, or within the table collection of the data set rather. So we're going to go to the first one at position 0. And I could do the same thing here, but I'm going to go ahead and just type in a different syntax for accessing a specific member of the row or the column collection. Okay, and then we'll do a console.readline. All right, so let's see if it works. Might have a bug or two in here that we'll have to work through, but that should basically give us a connection to the database, create a command that will allow us to fill up our data set with data from the customers table. We go ahead and fill up our data set using that command we created, or that command that we've created in the data adapter. And we'll look at data adapters and why they're important in just a few moments here. And then we start looping through rows. Let's see if it works. Let's save. And now let's run it. Okay, we do have an error. I think we ran into this last time. There we go. And it pulled the two customers from our customer table into our console window, so that worked. Okay, so at this point you only saw that we were able to close the connection yet still work with the data, but there's more to a data set than just that. So in this second example, we want to highlight that. And to accomplish that, what I'm going to do first of all is just copy off all of this content here that I've just typed in. For those of you who want to follow along or want to see the source code, and I'm going to put it right here. I'm going to type in a little sequence like that, and then I'm going to paste all this in. So you can get back to all that code that I wrote. And then I'm going to go and modify this existing one. So I still want to connect to the database. That's good. And I still want to open up the connection. Great. But the next thing I want to do is really focus on creating a series of data adapters. One for select, one for one data adapter, but I'm going to create 4 different commands within that data adapter. One for select, update, delete, and insert. So that's what I'm going to do right now, which, as you're going to see, is going to be a little bit more involved than just writing a simple SQL statement. I'm going to have to also kind of do what I do when I create stored procedures with input parameters. I'm going to have to give it some input parameters so that it knows where to put the values, for example, in an insert statement. So let's go ahead and get about creating that. So let's go ahead and create the data adapter. But we're not going to pass in a command. That's just one way that we can create a data adapter. Here's another way that we can do it. We're going to specifically work in this first case with a select command, which will allow us to get data from the database. So we're going to do myConnection.create command, then myDataAdapter select command.command text equals select star from customers. All right, so that gives us a select command. Now we need to create an insert command. Again, we're going to use this approach to creating a new command object, and now we can read it. And here is where I'm going to have to get a little trickier with my SQL. So we're going to insert into customers. And if you remember the insert syntax, first we're going to give it a series of column names, and then in the second set of parentheses we're going to give it the values that we want to put in there. So what I need to do actually is refresh my memory about all of the columns that we created. Okay, so we want to go first name, last name, city, and state. That's all we'll do. First name, last name, city, and state. Okay, so that should work. Now that we've created the command text, now we need to tell the data adapter how to match up the values that it's storing in its memory, the column names, with all of these input parameters that we've defined right here. So we have to go through and create and define a parameter collection. And so to do that, it's going to start out with myDataAdapter.InsertCommand.Parameters.add. And so we're going to add a series of parameters, and notice that there's 4 overloads to creating a parameter, an input parameter. So we're going to use, I believe, this one here. And notice the reason why I selected this 4th one is because at the very end here, you can see that we can give it a source column. So this will match up a column in our data set tables with a column in our SQL Server tables. Okay, so hopefully this will be more obvious in just a moment. So from our insert statement previously, we have a first name input parameter. Here we define the type, which will be SQL DB type dot, and if we look at our definition, I believe it's an nvarchar, and you can see it pops up as an option under there. It kind of gets buried, but here it is, nvarchar, and then we need to give it the size of the data. So if it's an nvarchar 50, then you put in the word 50, and now we want to select the source column, and the column name will be first name because it's pulling automatically from the database's definition. So now I need to do this for each one of the input parameters that we define in our input statement, insert statement. So this is why some people choose to use an application that will automatically generate code for this purpose, because they find themselves writing this same type of code every time, and it's something that some clever individual could go out, read the database, determine the definition, and then go ahead and generate all this out. In fact, as we're going to see in the next video, Visual Studio can do some of this for you. We're going to do this exact same example, except not write a line of code, or not write much code anyway. And you can see the power of Visual Studio in what it can do for you automatically. The trick is you need to know what it's doing before you ask it to do it. If you didn't know and you ran into problems, then you'd be scratching your head and you'd have to start over, or you'd post on a forum saying, hey, I'm trying to do this and it just doesn't work. And everybody would look at you like you're crazy. All right, so that completes the insert command. I have to do this also now for the update command. The same type of syntax where I'm creating the command, I'm filling it up with a statement, an insert statement, or in this case, an update statement, and then I'm going to give it parameters. This is almost identical, except for the command text. So here again, my adapter update command equals my connection dot create command, my data adapter update command text equals And here's an important thing too. We need to tell it which row that we want to update. So we need a where clause, where the customer ID equals customer ID. So that's probably the first order of business. When we create our parameters, we got to pass in customer ID. Let's not forget that. It won't let us forget that actually when we try to run it. If we forget one of the parameters, it'll error out. And so we're going to use the same approach that we did before. Customer ID. SQL DB int, and we happen to know the size of the int is 4. It just is. But if you had any doubt, you could look at the definitions over here in the table itself, Go into design mode and then look at the size of the data. Now, quite frankly, I could just copy these and just change out insert command to update command. In fact, let's go ahead and for the sake of brevity. Now you got to be careful when you're copying and pasting code because invariably you'll forget something. It's not something that you want to do lightly. You think it's easy, but I've done this more times than not, is just forget to change this to update. Whoops. Update command, and then I get an error and it's hard to track down because there's so much text you're trying to parse through and look through to see what the issue is. And then you realize, oh, I pasted that text in there. That's why it's blowing up. All right, so finally we need to create a data adapter, a delete command. So in a sense, what we're doing is giving our application everything it needs to know to resolve all of the data sets, insert, updates, deletes, when it connects back up to the database. And so here we only need a customer ID parameter. Okay, so that was the bulk of the hard work. Now we can kind of do what we've done earlier. Let's get rid of some of this stuff here. Let's see what else we can use. Yeah, we're going to go ahead and still use this, and we'll still use that, and we'll still use that. Here's what we're going to do, though, just to prove that all this works. So we're going to go console.writeLine, and we're going to type in the word before. So we're going to do a before and after. So what we'll do, we'll go ahead and print out everything, and then I'm going to, let's make sure, yeah, okay. Now we want to make some modifications to the data set's data and watch the fireworks, okay? So for the sake of brevity, I'm just going to paste in some code here, so I don't have to type it all out. It's not all that interesting code for our purposes. Okay, all it does is we're creating a new data row, a new row of data, specifically of the first and only table in our data set. And now I'm going to fill it up and create a new customer, Brian Faley. So here you can see row, column name, value, row, column name for that row based on that, and then set it equal to that value. And then what we're going to do is go back to that table. In the rows collection, we're going to select the add. Now at this point, when we use the add method and add our new row, we can continue to work with that row in memory, but it has not been committed to the database at this point. We'll get to that in just a moment. So here we go. Let's do it. This is an insert. This is an update. I'm just going to paste in some code here. And in this case, what I want to do is just go to the first row of our table, of our only table, but the first one. And we're going to set the first name, we're going to update it from Bob to Robert. So it was Bob Tabor, that now it'll be Robert Tabor. Okay. And then what we're going to do, I think, is do a delete. Whoops. And here I'm going to go to the second row, row 1, and I'm going to delete that row. Now what we want to do is connect back up, commit the changes. Whoops. It will connect on its own. No need to explicitly reopen the connection. So if we do this, my data adapter dot update, that update will require that we pass in our data set. And now what we want to do is console.after, right line after. So this is the after scenario. And I think all we need to do is just come back here where we loop through and print out the screen just to see all the changes that we've made to the data. We're going to do it back here. All right, so if everything goes according to plan here, let's build our project. And now let's run it. Uh-oh, I think I've got a problem here. All right, so we have, in this particular case, we have a problem with one of our data adapter definitions, an incorrect syntax near value. So let's take a look. The only thing that has a value that I'm missing an S on values. Let's run it again. Okay, so let's inspect what we've done here. This looks right. So before we have Bob Tabor and Steve Jaworski, but after we have Robert Tabor, so there's our update. There's no Steve Jaworski, so there's our delete, and there's our insert, Brian Faley. So this project worked correctly. Okay, so in this video, I wrote a ton of code, but you know, like I said earlier, you can do all of this, or at least something similar, without writing a single line of code. Visual Studio's IDE has several designers and wizards that will write all of this for you, so you won't believe how easy it is. And again, it's not what I want you to ever to do necessarily, but it sure is impressive nonetheless. And we're going to look at that in the next video. Thank you.